All right. Hello, everyone. It's been a bit of a break. Took a little holiday hiatus, and so we're back with another conversation for the Free Will Project. Today, I am joined by my friend Blane, and
Hey everyone.
yeah, I met Blane on Facebook and got to spend a little bit of time on his podcast, the Left in the Basement podcast, and that was
hmm
a good time.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, Blane, why don't you let the audience know a little bit about yourself?
Okay. So my name is Blane Legant, and I live in Georgia in the United States. Um, I'm a computer science student at a local university. Um, I guess more about me. I grew up homeschooled, which was a really interesting scenario and has had a lot of implications for, my education. So I'm actually 27 years old, but I'm just about to graduate in spring of this year. I started out at a community college and then actually went to Georgia Tech for 2 years. Unfortunately, wasn't able to cut the mustard there and then went to Kennesaw State University, and that's where I'm studying now. Um, let's see, I guess as far as interests, I'm really into politics and, science, skepticism. I used to consider myself a militant atheist, but now I'm a little bit less salty and seasoned. Actually, the free will skepticism has had a lot to do with that, actually, which I'm sure we'll get to. I like listening to electronic music and doing nonfiction writing. I'm currently working on like a book where it's maybe going to fracture into two or three, just I generally got a lot of aspirations. But what's really important to me is making the world a better place. And we all only have finite lifespans, and I think that there's some sort of duty we have to spend that lifespan we have to make things just a little bit less worse for the next series of uh I jokingly I say unfortunates, but I don't mean it negatively. But in the current state of the world, it makes sense. The next series of unfortunates that are cast, into this world. So,
That's funny.
yeah, yeah, I have a lot of weird quips, I guess. So, this is kind of my first foray into, I guess, what you could say, political, philosophical activism. We started the podcast in early December of last year, Left in the Basement, and we have 5 episodes out. Chet's is going to be coming out hopefully next Saturday. And so that's been something new to me, but kind of makes me anxious, but also excited to put myself out there. Um,
Well, you guys are doing
yeah,
a solid job. I've really enjoyed all the stuff I've heard so far. Even
yeah,
even when it's a point of view that like kind of grinds against my own
oh yeah,
prejudices.
oh yeah,
It's still it's a good listen. And it's a good exercise for the brain. You
really,
you don't want to get sucked into your own little social media bubbles and your own little information bubbles where you never
that's
hear
true.
a conflicting opinion.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I think and this is the context in which you're born is always going to have some sort of limitations to the knowledge that you can receive, both in every direction. And if we're going to approach something that's the closest thing possible to knowing the truth in each of our finite experiences we have access to, we always have to be questioning the things that we've already learned and be at the least open to the possibility that everything we've learned up to this point could be wrong, you know.
Nice. Nice.
Yeah.
That's I think that's the only way you get to something like free will skepticism.
Mm,
You really have to dig deep into your biases and
mm.
really examine even your direct experience with the world. And
Oh yeah.
yeah, it's tough. Um,
Well, I it's kind of been actually different for me because I have had, certain psychedelic drug experiences that have resulted in basically, you know, it's almost crushing the realization as it happens. At least it was for me. And I came out of these experiences basically without question. You know, I had heard people like, you know, Sam Harris and Matt Dillahunty on the Atheist Experience. You know, I used to watch the Atheist Experience like religiously. Like I would
I
put
know
it
Matt.
on random shuffle, like sleeping on the couch, you know, and go to sleep and crazy stuff like that. But you know, the thing was, at a certain point, when a certain state of consciousness, you can't help but realize what's actually going on. And it free will skepticism for me became free will obviousism, if you will. And you know, everything that Sam Harris and Matt Dillahunty had talked about shifted from something that was like, okay, that's a nice conceptual thing, you know, kind of like a political opinion, to something that was felt at the root of my being, and that I basically in some way have to communicate to people, because it's at the root, and I'm sure you agree, of so much that's out of place in our society today.
Yeah, that's actually I mean basically the inspiration for these conversations is that like this is such a deep issue,
Mm,
and if we can have a public conversation about um you know what is really behind our behavior, like what do people deserve, like all those deep
right.
issues. I mean that penetrates almost every aspect of your life, including
Exactly.
like how you talk to yourself, and
Oh
how
yeah.
you talk to your friends, and
Yeah.
uh, but before we get too deep into that stuff, which I
Sure.
definitely want to
Sorry, I'm a little
no,
excited.
no, you're doing good. Uh, no, I wanted to ask about homeschooling. You had mentioned that.
Oh yeah. Okay.
That's a curious topic for me because it seems like
Okay.
um, I've had friends that homeschooled their kids, and I feel like those kids got like probably the best experience available in our society. And also,
Mm,
I've seen people homeschool their kids, and I'm like, oh, maybe that's like not the peak educational experience. Like, so
well,
it seems like there's a real range of like outcomes when it comes to homeschooling.
yeah, and it's really a real polarized range, I've noticed. You know, there's not many people that lie in the middle and say, well, you know, it was okay. It was either, you know, like the situation where they skipped a grade every year and they were able to get their diploma and start, you know, community college at 16, or it was something like in my case where, you know, I mean, my basically my education stopped at the age of probably 10 or 11 years old, and I didn't have any formal education up until I started community college at 19. And so yeah, the range of possible experiences is really incredible, and it really comes up to, you know, how the parents administrate the homeschooling, you know. And you know, in my case, unfortunately, you know, my mom worked at night shift at the hospital as a nurse, and my dad worked a day job, and really good intentions ended up into kind of an irreconcilable, at least to them, mistake, you know.
Mm,
And so the interesting thing about that is homeschool education laws in the United States really suck. There's no federal sweeping administration that makes sure that basically anything is going on, and it's up to the state in the United States to decide how that's done. And unfortunately, in Georgia, the laws are incredibly lax.
mhm,
And what that means is if the designated homeschool administrator, which is the individual in the household educating, right, in the program, you have to register for an exemption with the State Board of Education. Um, if that person has a bachelor's degree, they're basically completely exempt from testing and oversight by the State Board of Education. All
wow.
they get is, yeah, a report card form every month, and all that needs to be done is A, B, B, C, A, B, C, and sent off. And that's basically what my parents did. So in that mode, homeschooling is terrible, right? I mean, I basically had to catch up through all of my middle school education and high school education at community college and then on at the same time as doing college classes, because that stuff like math classes and even English and writing is built on those kind of core things that I didn't even wasn't even exposed to. Now, fortunately, I had a very deep interest in computers, and Wikipedia hit the scene when I was 12 years old. So, I'm not uneducated, but there are certain things that maybe you're not put, people, the usual person doesn't gravitate toward mathematics. Like now I really appreciate it and I love
Hmm.
it and I want to get better. But as a kid, that didn't interest me.
Right.
But computers did. So, uh, I guess I know that was a lot, but that was kind of my experience. And I know that there's other people that have had those experiences and even worse. Fortunately, my parents were not like super religious or anything like that. But there's actually a website called Homeschool's Forgotten Kids. I'm sure you can Google it.
Wow.
And it's all about personal stories of people that were in situations like mine. And, of the vast majority of them, in addition to the educational neglect, had to do with, extremely controlling uh, parents and fundamentalist religions. And it's honestly, it's been really traumatizing for me and for a lot of others, and it's been something I've had to work through and part of my personal journey. But you know free will skepticism has given me a big tool in the toolbox to deal with all that trauma and what has happened, and the fact that if I get my classes done this semester, it'll be 8 years I've spent in college, instead of the usual 4. But, that's been a lot of time to catch up, both in the educational sense, right, in the backlog of the previous courses I didn't have access to, and also to just, grow emotionally. And, you know, the biggest thing has just been being able to work at something consistently and um, not not catastrophize little mistakes. And I guess I'll just wrap up my spiel here by saying a big part of helping with that has been, the Left in the Basement project, because it's something that's, kind of organically grown and we've been working on. And it's taken, it takes about 10 hours of work a week. So,
Nice. Yeah, no,
yeah,
the majority of you might call them like negative stories, or the negative reports I hear about homeschooling relate to like fundamentalist religion. So I'm I'm glad that that wasn't part of the picture, because that seems to tend to be pretty harmful.
yeah,
Um, but yeah, no, that's thank you for sharing that, because
yeah, you're welcome.
that's a hard story to tell. And
Yeah, it's important to tell though. Other people
yeah,
need to know that this kind of stuff happens. And because it's, in homeschool behind closed doors, people don't see it. So they just literally don't physically see it happening to kids,
right.
and they exist by the thousands. So it's good to
Yeah,
talk about at the least.
definitely. Thank you for volunteering that. So let's see. You brought up a whole host of topics at the
I
beginning.
know,
I
I
should have
know.
like written them all down, because it was great.
Oh,
Um, Let me go on some of these like little questions I have here. So like
sure.
as far as you mentioned your own free will skepticism, what's your background with that? Like where did you get into free will skepticism, and like how did it kind of worm its way into your life?
Sure. So, I mean, basically, like I said earlier with Sam Harris and Matt Dillahunty, those kinds of folks and being around, kind of the atheist osphere or whatever you want to call it, I heard mentionings of the topic, and as a person who had, an interest in science and skepticism, um, it really was something that was only I was aware of conceptually. I didn't really think that it impacted my life. I didn't really think that it served any sort of purpose that I could talk about socially, except for maybe, shutting down Christians somehow by saying that classical mechanics, proves determinism or whatever. um, but, as I've become more politically and socially cognizant of the goings-ons in our society, in addition to, the psychedelic drug experiences I've had, it's kind of merged into, something that's become, one of the best things that's happened in my life, honestly. And do you, I don't know, it's something that's weird to talk about to me, because now it's something that seems so obvious to my personal experience, right, and how I live my life today. But people don't want to talk about it, you know?
Right.
There's a really big aversion, I feel, to kind of addressing the the to me, the fact that there's no evidence in, scientific or even in anybody's own personal experience ever, that anybody could have ever done anything contrary to the stimulus of the environment, you know?
So I think this is one of the hardest barriers to get past with people
Yeah.
whenever you're trying to describe, like, what it would mean to be skeptical of your own sense of free will, because
Hmm.
everyone else draws on that, like, immediate, like, visceral sensation. They're convinced that, when they move their hands, it's because, like, the little man inside their head, or however they model it,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
because, like, they somehow, like, an interior, like, I made those calls and made those
Right.
movements.
Right.
And
And
it's so, like, how do you get how do you bridge that with people, or do you, or is it really hard, or
um so in my personal experience, I haven't really had much of a chance yet, to be honest. I'm kind of working on some writings, and this interview that I'm doing with you is really the first foray of mine into talking about it with anyone seriously. I mean, I've talked about the things casually with my friends, but most of them seem to take it as an, "Oh, okay, that's probably true" thing. You know what I mean? Kind of like I did with, back in my militant atheist
yeah,
era. Nobody's really solidified what that means as far as how that affects the relationship to oneself and one's thoughts, and also the goings-ons of the world. Um, but as to how I would bridge the gap, if we inspect our personal experience, very closely and very carefully, it becomes pretty obvious that basically what's happening is we're watching a movie. There's a visual field, there's audio, and there's also, the touch and taste sensations. And I think, arguably there's two or three others, right? Heat, maybe, and texture or whatever. But it's all just different frequencies of some sort of same thing, you know? And if I don't know the words I'm going to say until I say them, and it's, as Sam Harris puts it, a mystery to me, where am I to presume that anything else I do doesn't have the same sort of spontaneous uh, arrival from some sort of source that I don't have access to, you know? I would challenge anybody to examine their personal experience and think about any time in their life ever where they've ever found themselves able to do something other than they were stimulated to do, other than their senses informed them of. I think if we're deeply honest with ourselves, that's never happened, you
yeah,
know?
it, like,
But
it almost, like, by definition can't happen, like, you're
exactly. And then of course that's the A step. And then the B step is that everything in this world that we've constructed for ourselves is basically a hell when you consider the reality of determinism and that experience that we all have access to, you know. Yeah.
That's good. That's good. So you brought up psychedelics and
Yeah.
also like kind of introspective thinking. I noticed that in free will skeptic communities, like psychedelics
Mm-hmm.
comes up a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Meditation comes up a
Oh
lot.
yeah, I'm a big fan of, I mean, I'm a big fan of meditation.
These sort of different tools for like I don't know, kind of questioning your immediate experience or paying deeper attention to it. And I
Tools
feel like,
to, sorry,
no,
I
go
would
ahead.
say tools to peel off the ego.
Ooh, there you
Yeah.
go.
Yeah. I mean, I view, the brain is basically a causal pattern matching engine. And it runs, however, a software program called the ego. And the ego is what most people refer to when they say I. It's the software program.
Mhm.
Even the word I or me coming up comes out of nowhere and is just a word, you know. Um, as far as the psychedelic experiences, they basically can slingshot you into temporary frames of mind where the ego is non-existent. People have experiences where, they drastically change their life because they realize that they've been acting on a facade.
Mm.
And the ultimate, deepest, farthest realization in that direction is that everything is going according to some sort of deterministic firework unfolding. And what we really are is just a series of localized experiences of clusters of particles that have come together according to the lockstep trajectory that they had been in since the Big Bang. And that's an extremely horrifying and simultaneously freeing realization to have, because it means that your opinion is just as valid and just as misinformed potentially as everyone else's. There comes a kind of tiptoe action that you realize needs to take place with the words that you say and the actions that you take and how you relate to other people. I hope that wasn't too much of a tangent.
I
Did
like
you,
it. I like it.
you want to, yeah, did you want to pick apart any of that or anything?
uh, I like the description of the fireworks, the deterministic
Yeah,
fireworks.
I,
That's
I
fun.
actually, I got to tell you, full disclosure, I lifted that from Dr. James Cook, who hopefully I can speak with sometime. He's a pretty cool guy. I check out his YouTube channel. He talks a lot about, he has a video called The Joy of No Free Will, and talks a lot about some different psychedelic experiences and states of consciousness, meditation, etc.
Nice. I'm not sure if I'm familiar with that, so I'll have to check it out.
Yeah, please do.
Content recommendation.
I know, right?
Yeah. No, that's yeah, I think fundamentally you have to have some kind of experience that like shakes your sort of cultural
Mm,
frame a little bit, and
yeah.
it allows you to question it, because something I find is I feel like the language, and probably English in particular, but definitely like the language we use to express ourselves and to
Mm-hmm.
attribute like uh, intention to other agents in the world and stuff like that. I feel like
Mm-hmm.
our language very much biases itself towards that sort of like libertarian action in
Mm,
the world, like that
mm-hmm.
what we all think of as free will in our
Mm,
culture. And I think you really have to even get like critical of how you describe things, and like
mm. Of course, yeah.
and I can be there and I can be like skeptical on that level, and then 5 minutes later someone cuts me off in traffic and I'm like, that guy is an asshole. Like
Right.
so it's like it's something that I feel like comes and goes. uh
Yeah.
And I feel like people who probably like work harder at maintaining that realization probably don't, they're probably less likely to attribute like bad intentions to like other drivers, or when
Yeah,
you move through your daily life and people are how they are. And uh
yeah.
yeah,
Well, and that's kind of the Buddhist philosophy, and actually kind of at the core of many different spiritual and religious teachings. And so, the Buddhists call it dependent origination. Jesus called it God's plan. And it's it's something that has been echoed throughout the annals of history, but has been kind of conceptually masticated by popular religions into something that no longer represents what was being pointed to. You know, um,
yeah, I could see that definitely.
really, yeah, really, what it is we're kind of rediscovering, scientifically, thankfully, some of these teachings that have been around for a really long time, and it's an exciting time to be, in the sort of era where we're witnessing the coming together of, you know, uh, they're called mystical understandings and scientific understanding. I want to be clear that I'm not talking about, you know, what the Catholic Church says, or any church literature or anything like that. What I'm talking about is sort of the messages that were told by at the deep core that have been perverted since.
Yeah, I feel like I mean, it would be strange if humans existed for this long and there weren't some smart people who if we didn't have some
Yeah.
sages come along with some deep insights, like that would
Sat
be weird.
sat in silent long enough to realize,
Yeah,
what they were witnessing.
yeah,
And if I may, I just wanted to mention real quick, uh, Pierre Simon Laplace, who was a French philosopher. He actually has the first recorded kind of definition of determinism. I think it was like 1825, in the sort of the Western sphere, and he came up
sure.
with this thought experiment called Laplace's demon. And for a really long time, I was kind of obsessed with the thought of what this means. And basically, his experiment was, if an agent, or an intelligence, the demon, knows the precise location and momentum of every atom in the universe, their past and future values for any given time state are entailed and can be derived in some way. Therefore, they can be calculated with the laws of classical mechanics. And clearly, if anything can be calculated, right, there is one correct answer, or at least, now I'm thinking about, the square root thing. There's only a finite set of correct answers, correct?
Right.
And so there leaves no room for anything called that we would consider the intention of choice. You know what I mean? Choice kind of turns out to be a word that describes a process, a continuous process of integration from a brain and sense organs.
Right.
Choice isn't, as you said, like a little man in your head that's pushing the buttons. Um, and I just want to say,
Yeah.
I don't particularly like that description personally. To me, I think the sensation for free will for most people isn't even considered. It's just something that they think they have, kind of
Mhm.
like they think that they have a separate self,
Yeah, I kind of just to go back to like the way we talk, like I think our
Hmm.
language is very dualistic. I think that probably has a lot to do with Christianity,
Hmm.
where if you listen to people, a lot of times they're not talking as if they are like a biological entity. They're talking as
Hmm.
if they're like a soul inside of that biological entity.
Hmm.
You don't say I am a body, you say I have a body and things like that.
Right, right,
And it's
right.
it's a really weird way of talking. But I think it's just kind of like a cultural quirk we have, and
Hmm.
it's those little things, but they're like pervasive in life that are hard to be
Yeah.
skeptical about, and they kind of they kind of nudge you in the other direction to keep you from
Ex-
being skeptical. But
right, right. I mean, I've thought about the language sort of thing before. You know, we say, as you said, my body. We say things like my mind. You
mhm,
know, I I will say I think that's excellent for pointing out the illusion of self. And
yeah,
if you've, you know, a lot of sages and spiritual teachers, they say, you know, I'm just going to say, I say, when we say I or my, what we're referring to is conscious experience, which is the field in which the body sensations and the mind sensations are happening.
mhm,
Um, that's my personal outlook. I'm a consciousness, primitivist isn't the right word, but you know, I think consciousness is primary. I
mm,
think that there's one undivided consciousness, you know, one witnessing of what is going on, and through evolution and life and the Big Bang has subdivided into separate illusions of a separate self that you experience, you know, your life individually, and so do I, and so does everybody else. But, you know, I think that if there's one substrate, you know, one set of atoms in the universe, there has to be one set of consciousness, if you will, that is experiencing it.
hmm.
Um, so to me personally, to get people on the free will skepticism, to introduce them to that, I would like to bring that up as something. But you know, I wanted to ask you, really, you know, what changed for me was these psychedelic experiences where, you know, you basically just can't help but see what's happening. You know, how did you come to realize or come to free will skepticism? You know, did you have experiences like that, or was it more of an informed sort of understanding?
I would say it was a combination of like direct experiences, but also even getting into the subject, like finding material about it online, and I'd say between the sort of two paths, like at some point it clicked in my head, like, oh, like this is a way better explanation for the way things work in the world. Like, and
Exactly.
um, when
Oh
I
man.
when what really got me is I started thinking about, okay, if humans have free will, when did that happen? Like, when did that evolve? Like, and I started asking myself, do birds have free will? Free will?
Right,
Do like
right,
squirrels have free will? And
right,
I feel very comfortable saying like this set of creatures doesn't have free will. And then
right,
like the closer and closer you get to like primates and humans, the more like blurry things get. Like, does a gorilla have free will? Well, they can use
right,
language.
right.
I'd say one of the big moments for me, and it wasn't like an aha moment, but I took
Hmm.
uh, linguistics, an anthropology course on
Oh,
linguistics.
nice, nice. I love
And
linguistics.
yeah, when you get into linguistics, like kind of like you were talking about, you have these sort of like operating systems running in your brain. You have this sort of
Yeah.
software level.
Hmm.
I feel like linguistics is like when you're really learning how to like dig into that software level. And
Oh yeah.
yeah, it was through taking a course in linguistics that I really started uh, asking myself like what it means when I say things, which is a really
Yeah,
simple question to ask,
is
but it's
right, is what we do is codified as this language I'm studying.
right. And yeah, the more critical I got about how language works and like what things mean, and I read a book on general semantics. It was called "Tyranny of Words" by Stuart Chase, which
Hmm.
I've read criticisms of it. Apparently, it's not the best representation of general semantics, but it's a good way to get your like foot in the door on the subject.
Hmm. Okay.
And there's it's also like an older book, so there's probably more up to date stuff out there. But that was another book where like you start to tease apart like what it means to use a symbol and whether that symbol actually like refers to something real in the real world,
Hmm.
whether like symbols can exist all on their own with no like
Hmm.
physical referent. Like you can have
Hmm.
all kinds of ideas that don't actually correspond to anything real.
Hmm.
And yeah, on that level, when you start like dicing through things, I feel like I feel like it allows you to look at everything else with a lot more clarity, and it allows you to get a lot more critical with your own thoughts and with how you conceptualize the world. And I don't know,
Mm,
that was a big help. But
mm,
yeah, I would say I got hit from, a number of different angles, and eventually it clicked, and I'm like uh, pretty confident these days
right.
about
Yeah.
especially the idea of like libertarian free will being, nonsensical, or a myth, or however you want to phrase that. And then, when you get into like the more subtle positions in the debate, it gets more interesting.
Right.
Uh,
It's something, I think about is, what is the functional utility for, us as biological organisms of, the sort of notion that we have libertarian free will. Personally, I think that it's really just a convenient way to avoid, dealing with the responsibility that you have uh, to the effect that you have on the outside world, if that makes sense. And it's kind of paradoxical because what it allows you to do is always blame others, right,
mhm.
for their wrongdoing, but it also allows you and forces you to feel, an irrational amount of guilt over your own perceived mistakes, right?
Right.
And so, I think there's a degree to which people don't want to give up the ability to blame others for wrongdoing, right?
Mhm.
But they also don't want to give up the kind of perverse satisfaction they feel, and a lot of us cling on to um, when we feel that we've done something wrong. I've said before that we've built skyscrapers before we really truly understood just how sensitive we all are. And with things like social justice and renewed interest in just how we treat others. We're finally starting to undo some of those folds, in our collective hearts that result in unnecessary harmful behavior, um both to ourselves and others. And I think a big step to realizing that you can do that is that nothing could have ever gone any way than it had. you know you can talk about predestination or whatever, but there's a way of looking at it that says, we're all just here to learn lessons, and the experiences of our lives were the lessons that we were meant to learn. And you can call that God, or you can call that the universe, but it's basically, the realization that there is some sort of silent director to the phenomenal experience of your life, and the best thing that you can do is to watch it happen while being selectively reactive, you
Mm.
know?
I like that. I like
Yeah.
that. And it's you were talking about how like there's like an excess of guilt um kind of in our culture because of the way we internalize so many of these what we perceive as failings. We
Mm,
have and what I, from my sort of political lens, I would look and I would see like social failings. But I think in our society we are taught that, like, oh, if you can't find a job, that's your fault, like you
yes.
didn't try hard enough. And it's like, well,
Yeah.
who cares what the unemployment rate is, or even if those statistics are accurate, or you know if we tend to internalize our environmental conditions and just blame
Yeah.
ourselves for it. And
Yeah.
I think it's really profound that you point out that it's a paradox, that like we also um, that like doing so allows us to also like blame others for their own failings. And
Mhm.
that's what I read in Robert Sapolsky's Behave, which is like,
Mm.
I don't know, the best book in the world maybe. But
Make sure to put that on my reading list.
it's so good. But one of the things he mentioned in there is that, you know, you get neurological rewards for
Mm.
enforcing norms. Like it feels good to enforce norms. So while you have to accept all that guilt for yourself,
Mm.
you get the reward of like putting that guilt on everyone else,
Exactly. And
which is
interesting,
addictive.
right. And interestingly, there's some kind of scary parallels with capitalism itself in that it becomes less about equalizing, right, the guilt to zero, and more about, well, if I have to, blame myself for things because I somehow could have done different than I did, it becomes about the only way that I can feel good about myself is to blame others more, and you can see how this is just, basically a race to the bottom for every single thing that we could choose to do in our lives ever. you know
Oh
it's
yeah.
it's free, the whole, I mean, the free will thing is basically probably the most important imperative to realize in anyone's life today, and the longer that is we wait to spread the word, the longer that there's going to be unnecessary suffering. And it's truly incredible and ironic that it's just not being talked about yet. It's there's some sort of affront most people have with it. um we got some feedback, for the Left in the Basement podcast, that people were afraid of hearing about it, and it's something that we've got to be brave and put ourselves out there and push forward with. The ego, the software program that, surfaces words from whatever languages that to your awareness. The ego does not like being revealed to be a software program. you know
Hmm.
the ego is what's scared, and fortunately though, the ego isn't even real, and that's what that's what we need people to realize. If there's anything in this world that is actually not real, it's the ego. You know what I mean? The
Right.
false sense of self, the collection of personalities and traits that you call I. you know that's the real villain at the root of everything wrong today. It's the sense of separation. um
Yeah.
yeah.
I think it's a big part of why we can't, or at least not can't, that's too strong, but why we have such a hard time collaborating on a larger scale to solve like
mm,
the very real problems
mm,
we have, especially on
yes.
like the ecological scale, with climate change and everything. Well, we're all broken up into all these different nationalities. People are broken up into different political identities within those nationalities. We
Hmm.
have different religious identities,
Oh
or
yeah.
non-religious identities, or what, however, you have all these different sort of dressings for that
Right.
that ego, and it
mm,
makes it very
and
complicated. Whereas like if we were coming at this as like a pure equation of like, we have, you know so many billion people on the planet, we have these specific needs, and we have this situation with our environment that's in crisis. Like
mhm,
it's not an easy problem to solve, but it's made
right.
way more complicated by all these extra details about like, well, some people have like these biases against science, and it challenges their belief that the earth is 6,000 years old, and you know
Right.
we all came from the two people and the apple and the snake, and
Yeah.
it
Yeah,
gets way more complicated.
for sure. I mean, it really is just a numbers game, and where, the number of identities and collective groups that we have on this planet, and now that we're becoming aware of because of the internet, and global media, is exceeding the capacity of our primate brains to keep track of, and stuff is getting mixed up, basically. And so, the solution to that is, to a degree, we're going to have to loosen our grip on identity and who, we perceive ourselves to be, as a person, as a country, as a whatever, gradient scale, you want to call yourself at that time, right? We I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought.
That's all right. That's all right.
Yeah. Uh,
Um, but yeah, we were kind of talking about the difficulties of all these different identities and
right. Keeping track of the identities and letting go of it. And part of letting go of identity is coming back to the realization that, you're just the conscious, aware witness of everything that's going on in what you call your life. The things that you go through are meant to be experienced as they are. They don't need to be judged. And often it's our initial reactivity to say, but what if, or I need to do this, right? That causes so much of the uninformed actions that take place. If we can just create just a little bit of space between those thoughts we don't have control over that can be racist, or transphobic or what have you, unnecessarily judgmental, even to your roommates, right, at your home. If we can just create some space, what we allow ourselves to do is to evaluate the next action that we're going to take. I've heard it been said that, there free will, if it exists, the closest thing we can call to free will is that it's a skill, meaning that we can learn and train our neural network in our head to give us that space and allow itself to self-inquire and self-evaluate the actions as they come up proposed, right?
mm-hmm.
That's true freedom in this deterministic world that we find ourselves in. And that's why Alan Watts said psychedelics can give you a glimpse of that, but like any scientist looking in the microscope, at some point you have to look away from the microscope. And to me, that's where meditation comes in, and is really useful for that direct experience of how things actually are.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Alan Watts. He's an
Oh
excellent
yeah,
dude.
I agree.
Um, and he's another one of those guys that I don't just introduce so many ideas into our culture. He was kind of part of the psychedelic culture, though he wasn't really
Hmm.
like, strongly encouraging anything like that.
Right.
But, and what his book Eastern Wisdom was like another one of those moments that uh, demonstrated to me, like personally, like how much effect just words on a page can have on my actual like feeling of how comfortable I
Mm.
am in my own skin.
Right.
And
Right.
just
It's
in the
truly
span
magical.
of in the span of reading a book, inside of like a week or two or however long it took,
Hmm.
I felt like a different person. And
Mm.
it was because I just had these like different cognitive tools for like looking at the world. And
Exactly. And the importance, and that really shines a light as to the importance of education. If nobody can do anything that they were going to do, we have to work to influence the weights in the matrix in their brain. I think about artificial intelligence and machine learning. It's basically an extremely complex linear algebra matrix equation, of millions or billions of parameters, right? If it's really all just that, we have to there is such an imperative to educate people to how to behave in the world. We can't expect people to act better unless we show them how, and we show them
right.
all how. We're putting people out there without tools, and then blaming them for when they use what they have. And that's basically the founding principle of our criminal justice system, and retributive punishment. And I mean, it's really, truly the pinnacle of absurdity. um but
It
part,
really is.
yeah, part of dismantling that is talking about what we're talking about right now.
Yeah, and that's definitely a big one of my motivations. And I mean, um, just the way in which particularly the American criminal justice system is just like a disaster. There's certainly better and worse models on the planet, but man, this is on like the bad end of things. This is not how you
Yeah,
fix behavior. This is not how you have like a healthy society. And we
yeah.
know like it's the sort of interpersonal things you point out are obviously very necessary. We know also like a lot of it has to do with our social structure, with inequality and deprivation that people experience. So it's another one of those things where like it's important to not internalize too much of this stuff, and to recognize that a lot of it has to do with the way humans just react to environment, and
Mm,
we're in an unhealthy
right,
environment, and so
right.
like that's something that needs fixing. But also the institutions themselves.
Mm,
Like there's examples. I was reading about, I think, a Norwegian prison that takes the idea of respecting the prisoners,
yes.
and treating them as citizens, and putting them in a healthy environment, getting them to interact with each other in positive ways, giving them access to resources to create meaning in their own life.
Hmm.
Like this is all like super important stuff for getting people out
Right,
of behavioral ruts.
right.
And yeah, ultimately that is where I see like this issue linking up with my own personal like political outlook. Is I want to see criminal justice reform,
Hmm.
and I think understanding free will skepticism really clarifies that area. You don't
Yes,
need free will skepticism to understand that stuff, but man, I
right.
I feel like it really helps.
I mean,
Um,
it's the final punch for basically, any of these misconceptions that we have. Um, yeah, and on that, talking about, systems in this model, capitalism is revealed to be nothing more than a pachinko machine in which, you know, very few people on the outside get, well, I guess it'd be inverse, but you know what I'm saying. It's just a big pin board. People are born in situations that they didn't ask for because no one asked to be born. And it's all just this big, you know, unfurling that, I just it's hard for me to talk about because I don't understand what people want people to do, you know?
yeah,
Like how what more can you ask with just the time that you have in a day? Are we really saying that poor, people don't have access to funds and education and healthcare and enough money to live a meaningful, reasonable life because they're choosing at every instant to do something other than what they think would be best from themselves?
it's a lack of
Like,
character. It really is. It's
it's a
yeah, it's such an absurd claim, and it's not it's not a scientific view of
right,
people. It's a moralistic view that's based off of like a lot of folk superstition, a lot of like memes, like
right,
pulling yourself up by your bootstraps, and
right,
like it doesn't actually relate to how the world works. And
for
i
sure.
think i think like you mentioned, education is a big part of the puzzle. um I feel like my time in various anthropology courses really um, helped me at least understand it intellectually. Like I
Mm,
said, I still lose it on the visceral
right.
level sometimes, and
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
like, cut me off in traffic, you jerk. Uh,
Consider meditating.
but but also, I don't want to create policy based on my feelings in that moment,
Mm,
right? Like I want to
right.
create policy that actually aligns with what we know about human behavior,
Right.
and maybe that policy will also help me control my emotions in traffic. uh,
Exactly. Exactly. I mean, really what would be cool to see is education about the nature of the universe and how it's actually deterministic. I pause because I'm thinking about how people say, well, if everybody thinks that free will isn't real and it's just deterministic, then everything's going to go downhill. But that's fatalism, and that's not the case. what
Right.
what it needs to be taught in a certain way. Basically, how we have to act going forward with this new knowledge is everything that's ever happened in the past couldn't have been any other way, and we have to accept that. Any time spent saying should or would, or should, as Robert or as Hume pointed out in the 1700s, is meaningless. There's no such thing as should, you know, except unless we're talking about what we should do in the future.
Hmm.
We have to accept the past for what it is irrevocably, but we have to not project the past onto the future
Right.
in order to be truly free. You know what I mean? We're actually, it's actually ironic that the belief in free will is what is most enslaving us in this world, and that's
It's
a
true.
fact.
It's true.
So,
Yeah, like
I would love to see education about that. In our schooling, I'd love to see, you know, mindfulness meditation. And I want to be clear, I'm not being like religious, but just understanding the nature of mind and seeing how thoughts can arise via meditation or other techniques. I mean, can you imagine if starting in elementary school we just did a 30-minute meditation for every kid?
it would
it,
matter.
in generations, in short decades, just the the palette of the average person would change so drastically. It's really crazy, the very, very simple things we could do to make the world better for everyone if we just understood how things actually were.
Right. Right. And I have a feeling that, even little things like that would translate into bigger gains down the road. Uh, I
Exactly, it
think,
would truly be a ex- extrapolative effect.
yeah, I like it.
Yeah.
Meditation for all them elementary school kids, mandatory. Um, so yeah, we've kind of hit on most of the stuff we had written down here.
Yeah.
Is there anything that we left out that you were wanting to mention?
No, I mean, I think we hit on everything. What about you?
I like it. I like it. I think we did well.
Okay. Cool.
Um, so on that note, I'm going to go ahead and thank you for being here. I very much
Yeah.
appreciate it. It's
Yeah, thank
people
you,
like
Chet.
yeah, definitely. It's people like yourself that give me something to talk about, because
Mm-hmm.
yeah, if I get on here and try to rant by myself, it wouldn't go very well. I'm not one of those people. I'm always amazed that
Yeah.
there are people that can get online and talk
Just
for hours a day, every
to a
day,
flat screen.
and they have something to say. I'm like, I don't
Right.
understand it. But yeah,
Right.
I'm definitely grateful for your time, and I'm grateful for everyone that's watching.
Cool.
Definitely appreciate you uh, waiting out my little hiatus because I needed a
Oh, yeah,
break
no
over the
problem.
winter.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thanks for having me on, Chet. This was really fun. I hope I covered some good stuff for your audience.
Definitely.
Uh, Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, man. All right. Well, I hope you have a beautiful day.
Yep, you too. Talk to you soon. See you later.